The investor wasn't here to fund him. He was here to kill him. Blake Harrington had sat across from hundreds of investors in his career. Some ruthless, some visionary, many simply greedy. But tonight's meeting was different. The stakes weren't just financial. There was an undercurrent in the air, something Blake couldn't quite name but could feel in his bones. The Harrington Global penthouse conference room was dim except for the warm pool of light cast over the massive mahogany table. The rain was falling in slow, heavy sheets against the glass walls, the city lights distorted into shimmering streaks. Blake stood at the head of the table, adjusting the cuffs of his navy suit when the elevator doors opened. A man stepped out, tall, lean, mid-50s, his silver hair slicked back with meticulous precision. His suit was charcoal, perfectly tailored, but there was a stiffness to his shoulders, a way his eyes scanned the room before they settled on Blake that set alarms ringing in Blake's mind. "Mr. Harrington," the man said, voice deep, measured. "An honor." They shook hands, the grip firm but too firm, the kind that wasn't about politeness but about control. Blake gestured toward the seat opposite him. "Please have a seat, Miss Volkov," the man replied smoothly, taking the chair but not loosening his coat. Blake noticed the way he sat slightly forward, as though ready to move at a moment's notice. No briefcase, no folder, not even a tablet. Odd for a man supposedly coming to discuss an 8-figure investment. They began with pleasantries, superficial conversation about market volatility, the state of global shipping routes, and how unpredictable foreign investment had become. But Blake's mind wasn't on the words, it was on Volkov's hands. They were still resting near the hem of his coat, thumbs hooked slightly inwards, not relaxed, ready. His gaze didn't wander around the luxurious room or admire the skyline like most first-time visitors did. Instead, it swept the space in calculated arcs, corners, doors, sightlines. Blake had seen that before. Not in investors, but in bodyguards, military contractors, and hired killers. When Volkov finally leaned back slightly, his jacket pulled just enough for Blake to catch the glint of steel under the fabric. It was gone as quickly as it appeared, hidden by the shift of his arm, but Blake's stomach dropped. This wasn't a misunderstanding. Volkov was armed, and he wasn't here for negotiation. Blake kept his expression neutral, pouring himself a glass of water as he spoke. "So, you've reviewed the proposal?" Volkov smiled faintly, a smile that never touched his eyes. "I've reviewed everything I needed to." Blake set the glass down gently. "And I think you're worth far more than the papers say," Volkov said, his voice lowering slightly. "Far more than just numbers." It wasn't a compliment, it was an assessment, and it was laced with threat. Blake shifted his chair subtly, angling himself so his right side was closer to the table's edge. "So, Mr. Volkov," he said slowly, "if you're not here for the numbers, what exactly are you here for?" Volkov's hand moved, deliberate and unhurried, reaching into his jacket. Blake's pulse spiked, but he didn't move, not yet. Volkov withdrew the weapon with the same calm precision, the matte black finish catching the light just enough to make its presence undeniable. He set it on the table between them, not pointing it yet, just placing it there like an unconventional business tool. "I'm here," Volkov said softly, "because some people would prefer you didn't make it to your next quarterly report." The rain hammered harder against the glass, masking the faint hum of the building's air system. Blake let his eyes drop to the gun for only a second, before meeting Volkov's gaze again. "You could have just sent me an email," he said dryly. Volkov chuckled, low and humorless. "Emails can be deleted. I prefer conversations that end definitively." He nudged the gun slightly forward. Blake didn't flinch, but every instinct in his body screamed to act. He could feel the moment narrowing, the conversation collapsing in the tight corridor of survival. And in that corridor, there was no room for pleasantries anymore. Volkov's hand slid the gun across the table, just far enough for the muzzle to center on Blake's midsection. The motion was deliberate, slow, like a predator closing the final few inches to its prey. Blake didn't move, didn't even shift in his seat, but he could feel the weight of that black steel like a physical pressure against his chest. Volkov's eyes never left his, pale gray irises set in a face carved with calm precision. "We're going to keep this simple," he said, voice as steady as if he were discussing market projections. "You stay seated, you listen, and then you give me what I came for." His tone wasn't threatening in the way amateurs threatened. It wasn't raised. It didn't bluster. It was controlled, the way a surgeon might speak before cutting. Blake glanced toward the boardroom door without turning his head. Heavy mahogany, soundproof, locked. The private elevator was no better. He'd heard the faint metallic thump of its deadbolt engaging the moment Volkov entered. The man had shut the world out the second he stepped in. A roll of thunder cracked over the skyline, white light flaring against the glass walls, throwing the shadows of both men long across the table. "So tell me," Blake said, voice even, "what do you think I have that's worth walking into my office for with a gun?" Volkov's smile was small but sharp. Names, accounts, offshore movements, the kind of truths that ruin powerful men. He leaned forward slightly, the leather of his chair creaking. "Information you've been gathering for years. Information you shouldn't have. And information you are going to give me." Blake gave a short, humorless laugh. "You came to the wrong table for that." "No," Volkov replied. "I came to the only table that matters." His thumb tapped lightly against the grip of the pistol, a metronome to the narrowing of Blake's options. The rain outside was no longer background noise. It was the pulse of the room, ticking down to whatever came next. Volkov didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. The Dubai files aren't just leverage for you. They're a liability to everyone connected to you. You have a habit of collecting dangerous things, Blake. Things that don't belong to you. He leaned back now, just enough to show he was in no hurry. "You give me those files, and maybe I make a call that ensures you're still breathing tomorrow." Blake picked up his water glass, took a slow sip, watching the man over the rim. "And if I refuse? Then tomorrow's stock price for Harrington Global won't matter to you." Volkov's words carried no heat, no flourish. They were simple statements of cause and effect. Blake set the glass down without breaking eye contact. "You're assuming I keep something that dangerous anywhere near me." Volkov's lips curved faintly. "I think you're arrogant enough to believe you can protect it from anyone." Blake gave a small shrug. "Or smart enough to make sure anyone who tries regrets it." For a moment, neither spoke. The room was all low light, rain against glass, and the faint hum of the HVAC system pushing conditioned air into a space that had suddenly turned frigid. Volkov's gaze was the steady gaze of a man who had seen too many people break under pressure and knew exactly how long it took. Blake, on the other hand, wasn't just buying time. He was watching the angles. The space between Volkov's right arm and the table, the slight stiffness in his left shoulder, the exact position of the gun relative to the edge of the table, and the silent, invisible clock ticking down to when he'd make his move. The crack of thunder was the opening Blake had been waiting for. It rattled the glass like a drumhead, the lightning flash bleaching the room in a split second of stark white. Volkov's eyes flicked toward the window, barely a second's distraction, but enough. Blake's right hand dropped under the lip of the table, pressing a recessed panel only he knew was there. A soft magnetic click responded, and from the far wall, a section of wood paneling slid back with the whisper of precision engineering. Two men stepped through the opening, both in dark suits, both moving with the slow, deliberate confidence of professionals. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Their presence alone shifted the balance of the room like a tide turning. Volkov didn't flinch, but his grip on the gun altered, tightened. "Tell them to leave," he said, his tone unchanged. "Not tonight," Blake replied, standing slowly, every movement deliberate. One operative angled left, the other right, their path slicing the space between Volkov and any exit. Volkov's gaze tracked them, assessing distance, posture, weapons. "You think they'll shoot before I do?" he asked. Blake's voice was low, but it carried. "I think you're a professional, Volkov, which means you know exactly how this ends if you try." The man's eyes narrowed, a calculation running silently behind them. Slowly, the muzzle dipped. Not much, but enough. Blake took a single step closer, closing the gap just enough to make his words heavier. "Walk out while you still can." Volkov's jaw flexed once. He holstered the gun with a smooth motion, straightening his suit as though he had just concluded a meeting. "This isn't over," he said, the promise in his voice heavier than the weapon he carried. "It never is," Blake answered. Volkov walked between the operatives, each one turning slightly to shadow his movement, but never touching him. He stepped into the hallway without looking back. The panel slid shut behind him, sealing the room once again in its insulated quiet. Blake exhaled, the rain still hammering against the glass, the skyline fractured into shifting patterns of light and shadow. He'd survived the night, but somewhere beyond those walls, Volkov was already thinking about his return, and Blake knew the next time they sat across from each other, there would be no conversation at all.